I got pregnant after a class reunion, but I can't tell my husband. Now I don't know what to do with this problem. After all, I wasn't ready for this outcome. I don't even know where to begin. I never thought I'd be in this situation, and I still feel like my whole world has been turned upside down when I think about it. I've been married for almost 7 years now, and our son is 5. My husband and I have always been an us against everything kind of person, and I thought we had the perfect little life. We had our routine, our jobs, our weekends together, our small house that we were slowly getting comfortable with, and our habit of laughing at the same stupid jokes over and over again. I never thought I'd ever jeopardize all of that, but everything changed overnight. A week ago, there was a high school reunion. I went in fully expecting it to be a casual get-together, catch up with old acquaintances, exchange superficial stories about careers, about kids, take a few selfies for Instagram and go home. I didn't expect to feel so weird, like the past had suddenly crawled out from under the floor and pulled me into a vortex of memories. There he was, the guy I dated in high school. We broke up almost 20 years ago, and after that we only ran into each other a few times at random parties. I always considered our relationship to be childish nonsense, and honestly I almost forgot about him. But that night, his smile, his voice, as if he still remembered every little thing that once connected us, stunned me. I tell myself that it was all safe. We just talked, laughed, remembered weird stories from school. He was witty and attentive. I thought I could go home without a problem, but the alcohol did its job. We both had a few too many, and I know that's no excuse, but something happened between us. And since then, I can't stop thinking about it. I tried to pretend that nothing had happened, but after a couple of days, I started having strange symptoms that were bothering me. I went to the doctor and got confirmation that turned everything upside down. I was pregnant. I can't say that this feeling was instantly clear or that I knew the answer right away, but I was sitting in the office and trying not to panic, because I understood that I had a family, a husband, our son, who couldn't imagine that life could suddenly change. My thoughts were racing between what I should do, how to tell my husband about this, and how it was even possible to reconcile this secret with our reality. I love my husband. I love our son. I can't imagine losing them, but now this little secret hangs around my neck like a stone. Every time I look at my husband, when I see him smiling at our son, I feel guilty. I know he doesn't suspect anything, and I guess if I could, I'd take it all back. Erase that night from my memory so no one would get hurt. But I can't. I've tried to keep it all inside, but it gets harder every day. I dream about telling the truth, but I'm afraid it will destroy everything we've built. Sometimes I think about just having an abortion and never thinking about it again. But even that thought paralyzes me. It's not as easy as it seems. I know I'll regret it no matter what path I choose. I tried to talk to a friend about it, but I ended up just crying in the kitchen because I knew it was too painful to share. And at the same time, I feel a strange connection to this pregnancy because it's a part of me, a part of what happened, and I can't pretend it doesn't exist. My head is full of thoughts about how to tell my husband, how to keep the family together, what to do with the baby if it's not his. I'm afraid that if I tell, everything will change forever and we will never be the same. But if I don't tell, I won't be able to live with this secret. Sometimes I feel like I'm going crazy with this dilemma. I know what I did was wrong and it torments me. Every day I wake up and ask myself the same questions. How did I let this happen? Why now? How can I tell the truth without destroying what is dear to us? I try to think about the future, about how to prepare for the conversation, what words to choose, but my thoughts are confused. And I'm afraid that when the time comes, I will be at a loss. I know that no one can give me the right answer. This is my life, my mistake, my responsibility. But sometimes I wish someone would just say that everything will be okay, that I can find a way out and save our family. I don't know what will happen next. I don't know how to cope with this. I don't know if I can be honest and stay with those I love. And worse, sometimes I find myself thinking that maybe I'll feel better if I never tell. But I know that's wrong, and I'm afraid that hiding this truth will destroy me from the inside faster than any truth could destroy us. I'm still trying to figure out a solution, but every minute reminds me that the consequences are inevitable, and that the choice I make will determine the future of our family, our life, everything I value. I know there's no going back, but I'm afraid to move forward. The doctor sat across from me, and I tried not to look at the clock, as if time would speed up my own catastrophe. I remember how strange it was to hear words I already knew but hoped were wrong. She said the pregnancy was confirmed, and now it was time to discuss options. It all sounded almost mechanical, as if she was reading from a manual, but to me, it was the end of my entire world. The doctor explained that there were several options: to continue the pregnancy, to consider termination, or to weigh alternatives like giving the baby up for adoption. Every word hit me like something heavy on my chest. At first, I couldn't say a word. I listened and felt everything in my head getting mixed up. Fear, guilt, love for my husband and the child who was already growing up next to me, and some kind of incomprehensible responsibility for a person I didn't yet know, but who was already growing inside me. The doctor asked if I wanted to take a paternity test, and I almost cried, because I understood that the answer was obvious. He was not my husband. It was a moment when the world was divided into before and after. She said that it was normal, that many women find themselves in similar situations, that you need to think calmly, consider the consequences, support yourself, and seek help. But for me, it sounded like empty words. I felt like I was in an empty room, and all these options were a door to different lives, none of which seemed safe. I tried to imagine each path. If I have an abortion, I will be with my husband and our son. But how will I cope with the guilt that will haunt me every day, every minute? If I keep the child, how will I explain to my husband that this is not his child without ruining our entire lives? If I give him up for adoption, will it be easier or just another way to run from the consequences? I wrote down all my thoughts in a notebook, tried to break them down into rational parts, but my emotions overwhelmed everything. I remember how the doctor talked about medical risks, about psychological support, about groups where you can turn, and I nodded, pretending to understand everything. But in reality, I felt only emptiness and chaos inside. When I left the office, the city seemed strangely bright, as if the sun was laughing at me, and the people around me just continued to live, unaware that there was a storm inside me that could destroy everything. At home, I tried to sit down at the computer, read articles, search for stories of women in similar situations, but each of them ended with the same thought: everything is complicated, and there is no right solution. I tried to talk to a friend, but each time I broke down, unable to find the words so as not to look completely guilty. I felt that if I confessed, I would lose control, and if I remained silent, I would lose myself. I thought about our son, about the way he looks at me, how he trusts me, how he loves our husband, and I wanted to burst into tears, because I understood that this little person would become an innocent bystander to the consequences, whatever they were. That evening, I reviewed my options again. Abortion seemed like a quick solution, but a terrible emotional burden. Keeping the child meant accepting new realities and probably destroying the family. Adoption feels like a compromise, but it also leaves me feeling guilty and alone, like I'm leaving a part of myself behind forever. I tried to imagine the conversation with my husband. It felt like a dream in my head, him smiling, me breaking down, trying to explain, and every word sounding implausible. I thought about taking an anonymous paternity test to have at least a little clarity before making decisions. I know it will provide information, but it won't provide relief. I continue to live between fear and duty, and every day feels like a test of my strength. I try to be normal, smile at my son, cook dinner, discuss small things with my husband, but the tension is growing inside me. Sometimes I catch myself looking at my hands, my stomach, as if trying to find a sign that all of this is real and not some terrible fantasy. I try to focus on what I can control: my physical health, my appointments with doctors, my sleep. But emotions are impossible to control. I feel divided, as if I am not one but three different people with three different destinies, and each requires attention, care, love. Sometimes at night I wake up and think that if I am alone and think in silence, I will simply lose my mind. I know that I will have to make the decision myself, that no one will come and tell me what to do. It is scary and lonely, but sometimes I think that if I can understand the consequences of each choice, understand what I am ready to endure, then maybe some clarity will appear, some fulcrum from which I can take a step. And all this does not bring relief, only heaviness. I know that my husband deserves the truth, but I am afraid that the truth will destroy everything. And I know that I will suffer, thinking that it could be easier if I never tell. I still think about a paternity test, about the possibility of counseling a psychologist, about the fact that sometimes you just need to admit your own weakness in order to find a way forward. My mind is constantly spinning with thoughts of the consequences, how life will change, and how hard it will be to look my husband and son in the eye when it comes time to make a decision. I'm trying to find a balance between what's right and what's necessary for the family's survival, but right now that balance feels impossible. I know that time is running out and the decision is coming, and every day I'm forced to face a reality I don't want. I know that this process will be painful, that I will cry, that I will doubt, but I have to go through with it, even if it's scary. Every time my husband smiles at our son or talks about a future where they can be together, something unbearable squeezes in my chest. My heart beats faster, and my thoughts feel trapped between the desire to be honest and the terror of the consequences. The adjoining rooms of the house feel strangely alien, as if my entire life, which once seemed stable, is now on the verge of collapse. Casual phrases, words about vacation plans or discussions of trivialities like who will buy groceries tomorrow become a test of strength. Fear does not leave a minute. What if he guesses? What if he notices changes that are not yet obvious but could give away the secret? Every movement of the son, his laughter, is like a reminder that nothing will be the same if the truth comes out. Scenes of the conversation play out in my head. How to sit opposite my husband and say words that can destroy everything that has been built up over the years. Every attempt to imagine the reaction turns into a nightmare. Tears, silence, accusations, alienation. And at the same time, the thought of silence is no less pressing, because hiding the truth means deceiving the closest person, destroying trust that is impossible to fully restore. Every night when the lights go out and the house is plunged into silence, the fear becomes almost physical. He sits down next to her, like an invisible man, whispering that the mistake will inevitably be revealed, that her husband's heart could shatter into pieces, that her son's gaze will one day change. Sometimes it seems like the air is getting heavy, and it's almost impossible to breathe, because every breath reminds her of the secret that's pressing inside. Even simple household tasks turn into trials. Cooking, cleaning, talking, laughing, everything is colored with fear that is impossible to hide. The fear is not that someone will find out by accident, but about the reaction of the one you love the most. Every morning begins with the thought that you will soon have to decide, and this feeling is like a stone on your chest that cannot be moved. The brain tries to calculate all the options, to say now or a little later, to choose the moment when emotions will be under control, to choose words that will not cause pain. But the reality is that no words can guarantee the preservation of the family. Sometimes it seems that fear eats up all the space inside, leaving only a pulsating feeling of inevitable catastrophe. Pictures of the future flash through your head. A conversation that destroys the familiar world, the tears of a husband, confusion, anger, or silence, which is even worse, because silence sometimes destroys more than words. Thoughts about how to hide the pregnancy until it's too late appear. But these thoughts only cause even more guilt and anxiety, as if every minute brings the moment closer when the truth will burst out anyway. Trying to hold on to familiar rituals, coffee in the morning, walks with my son, conversations about small things, it feels like all of this is just a mask that cannot be worn forever. Every look from my husband seems like torture, because trust is red in it, and the thought of betraying this trust does not give me peace. Inside, there is a struggle between the need to be honest and the horror of the destruction of the family, as if two strong currents are fighting for control over life. Sometimes it seems that my heart is about to burst from the tension, and in such moments I cannot hide my tears even from myself. There is a feeling that the world around me has changed, and familiar things, food, work, my son's laughter, are now colored with anxiety that does not let go. Thoughts about a paternity test keep coming back as the only way to gain some control, but even this decision does not lift the burden of fear, because the truth will come out sooner or later anyway. Sometimes, when the house is quiet, it seems that you can hear your own fear as a separate voice that whispers. If you tell, everything will fall apart. If you don't tell, it will fall apart inside. The body reacts to this fear. The heart beats faster, the hands tremble, the breathing is intermittent, and it seems that the whole world is focused on one point inside, the moment of recognition. Thoughts about the future appear, about how the son will perceive this situation, about whether the husband will ever be able to forgive or at least understand. She tries to hold on to the image of a normal family in her head, but the harder she tries to hold on, the more clearly the fragility of everything that seemed solid becomes visible. Fear grows when day after day passes without a solution. Postponing the conversation does not make it easier, but only increases the tension, making every moment at home almost unbearable. Every casual thought about late-night conversations, about what might happen when the truth becomes clear, turns into a nightmare. Even thoughts about the outside world, friends, colleagues, casual acquaintances, are colored with anxiety, because someone might accidentally notice the changes and it will be a disaster. But the main fear is always how the husband will react, how he will perceive the truth, whether he will be able to forgive, whether he will remain the close person with whom life was created. This fear haunts every step, every word, every smile. Every decision seems either a betrayal or an escape, and in this chaos of thoughts, it is difficult to see any way out. Every day turns into a careful balancing act on the edge between everyday life and an internal storm. The house seems too small for all the anxiety that sits inside. The son runs around the rooms, laughs, asks simple things like why it's hot today, and every little thing reminds us how hard it will be to hide the truth. The husband smiles his usual smile, talks about work, plans for the weekend, discusses shopping and evenings with friends, but his thoughts continue to rush about, trying to anticipate every glance, every remark that could accidentally reveal the secret. Sometimes it seems that the husband's eyes read deeper than words allow, that he feels something that is not there, and the heart contracts with fear that this secret will one day break through. Every morning begins with an attempt to pull himself together, to breathe deeply, to pretend that everything is as usual. But on the surface of calm, there is a storm: anxiety, guilt, a growing connection with the child inside, the fear of losing everything that has been built. Every movement, every gesture is controlled by the thought that hints cannot be left. Preparing breakfast or dinner turns into a small strategic operation, maintaining a familiar rhythm, hiding changes in the body, avoiding discussions that can lead to suspicion. Sometimes you just want to scream, cry, or disappear for a few hours to go crazy alone, but you can't. Life goes on, and no one suspects the internal struggle. At work and when communicating with friends, you have to pretend to be normal, laugh at jokes, discuss plans. All conversations seem superficial, as if every word is a mask so that no one can see your true emotions. Rituals and little tricks gradually form, making sure that the food on the table corresponds to the family's habits, planning outings and meetings so as to hide changes in the schedule, avoiding unnecessary questions about health or well-being. There is a constant tension inside, as if any careless movement could destroy the fragile illusion of normality. Every time your son hugs or reaches for your husband's hands, your heart squeezes with guilt that such a terrible truth is hidden under the mask of happiness. Sometimes it seems that your breathing becomes intermittent, and your body reacts to stress as if it were the constant presence of an outside observer that no one sees. All these days are spent in a mode of constant checking. Are the changes too visible? Will someone notice fatigue, strange behavior, or emotions that do not coincide with the usual smile? At the same time, thoughts about the future constantly return: how the child will be born, how to explain or hide the appearance of a new person, how to prepare for the doctors, how to cope with emotions that cannot be shared with anyone. Sometimes it seems that fear lives separately, like a creature that watches every step, and the consciousness is simply trying to maintain a routine so that life does not fall apart. At work and in social gatherings, thoughts about pregnancy pop up suddenly, capturing attention for a split second, and breathing quickens. But outwardly, the usual speech, laughter, participation in discussions continue. With each day, the physical feeling of anxiety intensifies. Sometimes there is a feeling of heaviness in the stomach, which is impossible to hide completely, but has to be masked by pretending to be tired or slightly cold. Fear does not leave for a minute, permeates every interaction with a son, husband, friends. But there is also a strange strength, a sense of determination. You can't destroy what is dear. The secret becomes a part of life, as if another world coexists in parallel with the usual reality. A strict discipline is formed inside. Never give in to panic, maintain familiar rituals, not show anxiety, manage time and space so that no one can guess what is happening. Every decision is now double. Outwardly, everything is as always. Internally, constant checking, analysis of possible reactions, behavior adjustment, maintaining the illusion of safety. Sometimes there is a moment of despair, when it seems that it is impossible to cope. You just want to give up, but thoughts of your son and a man's trusting smile bring you back to control. Every morning begins with repeating these rules. Smile, say familiar things, maintain a routine, hide anxiety, and the longer this process continues, the stronger the feeling that any mistake can become a catastrophe. Sometimes the nights feel like trials, lying in the dark and hearing the regular, familiar breathing of the house, and every movement feels like a test of how long you can keep the secret. Plans are constantly spinning in your head so that visits to the doctor go unnoticed, so that no one asks unnecessary questions, so that you remain in complete control of the situation. But even these plans do not provide complete peace. Fear lives in the body, in thoughts, in every glance at her husband and son, as if an invisible thread connects them to the secret, and any violation of this thread can cause a catastrophe. Every movement, every look, every conversation is a potential trap, and you need to be extremely attentive. But at the same time, there is a sense of strength, the ability to hide the truth, to control the situation, to find moments of calm in the chaos. The secret has become a part of life, and although it takes away peace, it also makes you value every ordinary day, every laugh of your son, every smile of your husband, because now it is clear that your usual life is precious and fragile. All the last days were tense. Every moment was like walking on thin ice. I tried to hold on, hide the changes, control my emotions so as not to give myself away, but the inner burden was becoming unbearable. Fear turned into a constant presence. Every word of my husband, every look of my son, every sound in the house like a signal that the secret could break through. The day came when it became clear. It was impossible to hide it any longer. The truth would find its way. My heart was pounding as I sat down to dinner. The whole familiar routine seemed like an absurd mask. Every time my husband looked at his plate, at his son's smile, at his hands, as if he felt that something had changed. Finally, the moment came when there was no strength or opportunity to pretend. I sat down opposite him, trying to find words that would not destroy everything instantly. But at the same time, I was afraid that any phrase would be a catastrophe. Whether I said it directly or in a veiled way, it didn't matter because the reaction was inevitable anyway. And then I exhaled and said, "I'm pregnant. This is not your child." The words hung in the air like a lightning strike. He froze, his gaze darkened, his lips pressed together. For a moment, it seemed that everything around had disappeared. Only silence and a trembling hand that had just touched its clothes so as not to tremble too much. Then the questions began to rain down, sharp, filled with anger, confusion, and incomprehension. The speech broke off. The words rolled into a stream of accusations and shocked bewilderment. How is this possible? Why is it like this? It seemed he was trying to connect the facts with his own reality, but nothing came together. His heart was constricted by how angry he was. But at the same time there was incomprehension in his eyes, as if he had encountered a situation for which there were no instructions for the first time. The house became cold, although the windows were closed, because the tension literally paralyzed the space. He walked from room to room, grabbing hands or shoulders to show that he did not know how to react, and at the same time demanding an explanation. The words fell in sharp blows, and his voice trembled from the internal struggle between rage and complete confusion. No plan, no attempt to prepare helped because the reaction exceeded all expectations. Anger was mixed with shock, with a loss of orientation in his usual life, with the inability to understand what to do next. At some point he sat up, leaning on the table, and the silence became even louder than the words. It seemed like the house was holding its breath along with them. Why? Why did this happen? He repeated over and over, as if trying to convince himself that it was not true, that it was impossible, that it was some kind of nightmare. The fear of his anger and at the same time misunderstanding almost paralyzed him, but there was no retreat. The truth had been voiced and it could not be taken back. The son was playing somewhere nearby, but there was such tension in the room that it seemed he heard everything, although he did not yet understand. The husband looked at his hands, at his face, at the familiar details of life that had seemed familiar until this moment. And in every movement it was clear. You do not know what to do, how to react, and anger is only part of a complex cocktail of emotions. Fear did not let go. You could not allow words to escape control. You could not show tears too clearly, because this could increase anger or cause even greater bewilderment. Every glance at him showed that the usual confidence was gone, that the man with whom life was built found himself in a situation for which there were no instructions, and anger became the only tool to cope with the inner chaos. He screamed, demanded explanations, but at the same time tried to understand, not knowing where to start. It seemed that each phrase was tearing apart what seemed indestructible. Inside there was a mixture of fear, guilt, and that strange sense of responsibility that did not allow him to retreat. The words that the child was not his sounded like a sentence, but at the same time a revelation that could not be hidden any longer. At some point, he fell silent, clenching his fists, as if trying to collect his thoughts, but his eyes betrayed all the confusion. Fear and anger were intertwined, and in this combination there was a feeling of complete uncertainty. He did not know what to do, and the usual reactions that had worked before were powerless. His heart sank with every breath, with every step next to him, because the reaction was unpredictable and strong. He walked, dropping offended and harsh words, but at the same time in their depths one could read confusion, a complete lack of understanding of how to live on. The evening stretched out in painful silence, interrupted by random phrases and sighs, as if the house was trying to digest what was said along with them. Fear and anxiety remained, because the situation changed everything. The familiar world collapsed, and it was necessary to find new rules, and her husband's anger only intensified the feeling of danger. At the same time, there was a moment of surprise. In his eyes there flashed not only anger, but also surprise, as if for the first time he encountered a reality that could not be controlled. He wanted to blame, demand, shout, but at the same time he understood that there was no precise reaction, and this made his behavior unpredictable. It was as if they were both in unknown territory. Fear, guilt, the truth, and the impossibility of hiding it created a tension that kept them trapped. Every movement, every look, every phrase was filled with fear, anger, and misunderstanding. And as the night went on, it became clear that their usual life would no longer be the same, that the consequences of what was said would weigh on them for a long time, and that her husband's reactions could no longer be predicted.